All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jake Knowlton, and I don't want to waste any of this time, so let's get to it. I'd like to introduce Robert M. Lee, founder and CEO of Dragos, Air Force veteran.
But what's the cat's name, Jake?
That's Lucy.
Okay.
Hi, Lucy.
That's the important part. That's what everyone's
Yeah.
actually waiting for.
I know.
Good.
Of course, she jumps in there right before we go live. That's fine.
That's awesome. All right, perfect. Well, thanks, Jake, and I'll go ahead and kick off. Good morning, or technically afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, I suppose. Everybody, thanks for joining me. Now, the kind folks here asked me to do a presentation, have PowerPoint and everything else. I just couldn't bring myself to it, so I'm going to call a little bit of an audible. I've got a PowerPoint deck over here. There's no way I want to stand in front of a bunch of military folks as a prior Air Force officer and present PowerPoint. Like, the jokes would just be ridiculous. It would be uncomfortable. Like, I'd rather just talk to y'all. And so I'm really glad to be the keynote here. I think, VetSecCon represents just a lot of excitement in the community around our veterans. Most of you have been in the military, or some of you still are. And there's always been a very strong military vibe in the InfoSec community. What I mean by that is a lot of our wonderful folks in various military services, right? Air Force, Navy, God forbid, even sometimes Army, have made their way out into the private sector. And with the experience and the skill sets they have and just the mission-driven focus, have done very, very well. Obviously, I'm biased, having been military and National Security Agency. I'm very biased to like that type of background. But I can say in my own journey, having that experience, that kind of national security flavor on what we were doing, the importance of it, having the resources available to go really explore the topic, that was very foundational and important in my own journey. So I hope it has been for you as well. But I know, talking to many folks out in the community, that's really been a big boon for folks. And then people leave the military and they go into the private sector and they bring that expertise and those insights, and it's cool. It's a nice mixing and matching of skills and expertise. Well, today though, what I want to talk to you about is industrial. Sometimes we'll talk about it in terms of ICS, which is industrial control systems. Sometimes we'll talk about it in the context of OT, which is operational technology. Either way, we're talking about mission critical systems. You're talking about those industrial environments. And there is a lot going on. And instead of having a presentation where I say, and here's this PLC, and this is what this looks like, I want to have a little higher level discussion with you, because that's the benefit of a keynote, right? Keynotes really only have two jobs: to get people hyped up for the conference in general, and to massively run over their time and completely screw up the schedule, pissing off all the conference organizers. Like, that's the two things we got to do. So I'm going to try my best on both of those. But I want to set the stage at a higher level than the tech discussion, because there's a lot happening in the industrial community these days. And if you're just dialing in, it is a absolute head fake and spin on all the things that are taking place from a national perspective, on national security, down to regulations and frameworks, over to board topics. Like, I used to have conversations with CISOs and CIOs. Pretty much all of my conversations these days are CEOs and board level. And it's insane the level of focus that OT cybersecurity is getting, which is good. But I want to level set with, where have we been? Why are we here now? Why is everybody kind of freaking out? Like, what has changed? And then give you some insights of what we're seeing to think about in your own professional development, and maybe even at the security of the companies that you work at today. So that's kind of what I'll hope to accomplish. I think that's only going to take me 35 to 40 minutes to run through. I mean, I'm just going to be gabbing along, so who knows? But that means that the ownership then is on y'all to ask some good questions. I want good questions. I would prefer this to actually be a fireside style chat where I don't talk at all except for answer your questions. But I got to contribute something to the party, so I'll do my part. But I need y'all to ask good questions. And we'll keep it fun. So you can ask anything you want, just don't be boring. Okay. All right. So let's talk about where we are and kind of what's been happening. So back in the day, right, when national security leaders, policymakers, executives looked at industrial security, when they looked at critical infrastructure security, that conversation on critical infrastructure protection and cybersecurity has existed for decades. Nothing's new there. And that is where a lot of people are going, we've been talking about this since the 90s. What's the big driver now? What the hell is going on? Like, new regulations, policy discussions, President of the United States coming out talking about ICS specifically. It's what is going on? And it would be fair to look back and say, well, yeah, we've been talking about this all along, but there's been some big shifts. So back in 1998, is probably one of the first major public policy discussions around critical infrastructure protection. It's not saying that a lot wasn't already talked about, but 1998 Presidential Directive 63 came out, and it said critical infrastructure is vulnerable to cyber attacks, and we need the private sector to go take a look at this. The government has a role and responsibility too. We're going to set up sector-specific agencies like Department of Energy to be over the energy infrastructure in the United States. We're going to set up these infrastructure, kind of ownership inside the government. But hey, private sector, you're the asset owners and operators. The government doesn't own and operate many power plants, and does some, but doesn't own and operate many of them. Chemical plants, manufacturing sites, rail yards. Most of the owners of that and most of the operators of it are private sector. And what they were essentially saying in 1998, which is still true today, is every one of those private owners and operators, you have a responsibility to national security and business risk. So you as a CEO and board have business risk you need to manage, and that's in the interest of your shareholders or anything that you have in terms of a governance structure in the company. And you have a national security risk of you own and operate critical infrastructure. You could be attacked, or even if it's not attacks, you could have resilience issues that lead to loss of life, national security issues, grave economic damage, etc. And what they've essentially said was the business risk, you do whatever you want. It's your call. That's your lane. You can invest as much or as little as you want against business risk. But you can't make a choice as a CEO of a company to underinvest in the national security portion of the risk. Just by its very duty of being critical infrastructure, you got to invest there. Now, it didn't say what to do, and they didn't have the answers of you got to accomplish these things or these kind of outcomes, but that was generally the conversation, and that generally stays true today. And at the time, the CEOs, most of the ones across the country, said, okay, I get it. No problem. We want to take this seriously. What should we do? And so they would turn to their security staff and largely their CIOs at the time, because there wasn't a whole lot of chief information security officers reporting in. Actually, there wasn't a whole lot of chief information security officers in the early 2000s in general. But they were turning to their staff and their executive staff and saying, what do we need to do? I want you to reduce cyber risk across the business, especially as it relates to things that could cause big national impacts. And so that's a very reasonable ask from a CEO or board turning into a staff. Or her staff or their staff. The cyber risk of this company needs to be reduced. Go for it. And at the time, and I'm, kind of broad stereotyping here, but at the time, a lot of those executives and a lot of the staff said, yeah, cybersecurity, we should be doing our InfoSec, we should be doing that. And they went to their operations side of their house. Because remember, a power company, a rail company, a manufacturing company, they've got their IT side of the house and they've got their OT side of the house. And what makes them critical infrastructure is the services and goods they provide, which are coming out of the OT side of the house, not the IT side of the house. I'm not saying one, IT is not important, but what makes them critical infrastructure is the physics and all that kind of stuff, which is in the OT side. And so those staffs went to their operations leaders, their plant managers and their VP of operations and all the side of the house on the engineering and ops side and said, hey, we're supposed to reduce cyber risk to the business overall. You're a big part of the business. What do you need from us, or what are you seeing? Or maybe we can get in here and do some patching of legacy systems and things like that. Like we want to engage you. And there was kind of responses kind of fell into buckets, right? Again, not trying to over stereotype anybody, but they fell into some buckets. There was some companies where the operations side of the house said, okay, let's figure this out together. That was the massive minority, but there were some companies that have been really, truly doing IT and OT security for a long time now. There was the vast majority that said, that doesn't apply to us. We're disconnected, air-gapped, segmented, call it whatever you want. We don't have the cyber risk that you're talking about. That's your internet and information technology systems, and you should go focus on the enterprise and leave us alone in the plant. And that vast majority, you could sect that out into two, where a big portion of that was an honest conversation. In the late 90s, early 2000s, lots of people were actually disconnected. Maybe not truly air-gapped, but really heavily segmented, segregated, disconnected, call it what you want. There was a portion that it wasn't true, and the operations people knew it. And I'm not saying they were being malicious, but there was some companies that knew damn well they weren't disconnected from remote connectivity. But it was a defensive move because when a typical, prototypical IT security person would come into a plant, they'd go, oh, Windows XP, legacy systems, lack of encryption. We should do these things, which actually don't make sense, and I'll talk about later. I mean, they'd take the IT security playbook and just copy and paste it into the operations side of the house. And they cause disruptions. And there are lots of companies across the United States that have got the same story, and it's an accurate story, where IT came in and ran a Nessus scan or patched a system or whatever else and dropped operations. I have responded to more power outages due to well-intentioned IT people than Russia, China, and Iran combined. Okay, so those stories are real and they're impactful and they hurt. They burn culture pretty quick. So to level set, CEO says reduce cyber risk across the organization. Staff goes to operations. Some small sliver of the community says let's go. Most community says no, 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 get out. You don't belong here. We don't have that risk. Some portion of that knew better. The majority didn't. So the majority of the case, the 90% of the community, there was a real and well-intentioned conversation of that risk doesn't apply to us. Cool. Break. When you look at that story, if you're a policymaker or you're a board member, you're a CEO, not practitioners, not the stuff we're dealing with day in and day out. Well, we've seen this before, and I know that's not true. Doesn't matter. At a presidential and policy and National Security Council and Congress kind of level, and at a CEO and board level, you're looking at this problem going, we're okay. We've been talking about this for 20 plus years. Hell, we even had standards and frameworks and regulations that have come out in the meantime. We're already okay. We've made tons of investments into cybersecurity. The reality, though, is all of those investments, or the vast majority of them, were on the enterprise IT side of the house, not OT. OT, at best, got firewalls, sometimes patching, maybe antivirus, when most of our devices can't even have it. That was it. It was all preventative. We're just going to prevent stuff from getting in. Other than that, who knows? And so if you're policy or national leader or CEO, you think you're okay. I've been in plenty of board meetings when the beautiful stats get presented from the CIO or the CSO. Look at this, look at our detection rates, look at our patching rates, look at all the nice metrics, look at our NIST cybersecurity framework scores. They go, oh yeah, we're good. And I'm in there like, is that just the enterprise IT side of the house? The CEO is like, what are you talking about? That's our business. And the CIO goes, what? No, that's not our business. That's the enterprise. That doesn't apply to the plants? No. What? Like all of our revenue is made out of the plants? What do you mean that we're spending 10 times the amount of money on our website? And it's a massive disconnect that takes place. Most CEOs and boards are getting presented a very biased view of the security in their company. And it is eye-opening when they learn to ask the questions of IT versus OT. Okay. Not every company is the same. It's not true everywhere, but it's a lot of the conversations that we're having right now. At a policy perspective, it's the same conversation. Hey, we've been investing in all this cybersecurity and information sharing and exercises and all this other stuff. Aren't we done already? We're not. So what happened? And this is, again, my analysis, my view of this. What happened, in my opinion, is a lot of 2015 is catching up to us. Okay. What do I mean by that? In 2015, the first ever cyber attack took down electric power. First time we actually had electric power systems go down due to a cyber attack. It happened in Ukraine. I got to lead up a portion of the investigation, which was fun and great and interesting and all that nice stuff. When I came back with great folks like Tim Conway and Mike Asante from working the investigation and presenting it back up to National Security Council and the White House and all the right people, there was a very, very honest but misinformed view of, poor Ukraine. But that can't happen here. And as we're like looking at each other across the room, it's like, what do you mean it can't happen in the United States? Well, their electric power systems went down, right? Like, yeah. Well, that's probably because they didn't invest in cybersecurity. Look, there's no information sharing in ISACs and all this other stuff in Ukraine. We do all that. We've been doing this for a while. We have great courses, Idaho National Labs, great 5-day training and stuff on this. We're done. What are you talking about? We're good. And Mike and Tim and I tried to vocally be like, oh, that's not true. You're talking enterprise IT investments. We are not good at like distribution substations. And, our whole approach has been prevention on, transmission substations and power plants. And yeah, don't freak out. It's harder to do here And the design of our system makes it really resilient, where our engineers and operators have built good, reliable infrastructure that lends towards security, but it's not secure. Like there's a difference there. And it's like, no, you guys, thanks experts. We've heard from the CEOs and stuff that we're good. And so for months, if you look into 2016, the beginning of 2016, just do a Google search and band it off, there was a lot of commentary coming out of the White House and DOE and DHS that we're okay. That can't happen here, in private FBI briefings and so forth. And they weren't trying to mislead the public. They legitimately thought, no, guys, hello, 1998, we're on top of this. We got it. And this whole discussion was, we're okay. And what happened, rightfully, and we have to be appreciative, especially to our power companies here, is the power companies were getting on top of it and talking to their staffs and going, uh-oh, it'd be different. And we don't need to freak out the public over this. This isn't like, let's not hype stuff up, but we're not okay. We've done a lot of good. We've invested correctly, but our industry has changed. And where we thought we used to be disconnected, connectivity has found a way, right? Jurassic Park, like life finds a way. Like it was honest answer 10 years ago, but we have a lot of remote connectivity directly to the vendors and OEMs and integrators, and we aren't just disconnected anymore. This is wrong. Like something's got to change. And so the power company CEOs and power company executives started educating the White House, DHS, DOE, et cetera, at the leadership level. I'm not saying practitioners in those agencies didn't know either, but at the policymaker level, there was good high-level discussions of, I don't think you're accurate. Yes, it'd be harder to take us down, but you could. Like that attack verbatim could happen in the United States. And you can see a shift. Again, go do the Google search time shift. You can see January, February, March, April, May into June. Don't worry, that can't happen here. Then around July in 2016 on, it was, well, it could, but our infrastructure is pretty resilient and it'd be harder to take us down. And so you start seeing that shift. Then things heat up. At the end of 2016, you had the second ever cyber attack to happen to take down electric power, again in Ukraine, this time with malware in a way that is highly scalable. If you talk to a power engineer about what happened in 2015, it's like, it sucks, but like, I get it. Of course, you can operate circuit breakers through a human machine interface. That's what operators do. Why can't the adversary do it? 2016 scares people when they look at what was actually done in the crash override malware and how they had an IEC 104, which is a protocol. They had IEC 104 master spin up and being able to send legitimate commands to RTUs, the controllers. That's some scary stuff, actually. And it works on any similar protocol stack across transmission. It's scalable. So people started getting really freaked out. 2016, 2017, though, there was a whole lot of like other things the national policy scene to focus on with elections and, Russia and all sorts of other stuff. So it kind of lost a little focus. But then 2017, you had the first ever cyber attack on human life, where an adversary broke into a petrochemical facility in Saudi Arabia, deployed the Trisis or Triton malware, and explicitly tried to kill people by compromising the safety system. These systems are only in place to protect human life in the event of a catastrophic failure in a production environment. And the adversary explicitly tried to kill people. And that scared the hell out of everybody. And that same adversary started targeting power and oil and gas companies in the United States, Australia, Norway. They started going after other places. They didn't deploy malware, but they started targeting those places, scaring people. 2019, lots of new groups getting discovered. And it's not that the threats got so much worse all of a sudden. It's that we started getting visibility in these locations. We started getting insights and OTs. A lot of portions of the community started investing post 2015 even more and doing the right thing inside the operations environments. And with that visibility, we started seeing more. As we looked more, we saw more. So now we start seeing a dozen plus state actor teams targeting industrial systems. People started getting scared. Then 2020 happened. And in 2020, the most impactful thing, which I still think most people underplay, was SolarWinds. You hear about SolarWinds all the time. You're probably bored of the topic. That's fine. But most of what you've heard about SolarWinds was on the IT side of the house. Microsoft and FireEye did a phenomenal job talking about what they saw. DHS did a phenomenal job talking what they saw. Everyone did a good job talking about what they saw with SolarWinds and the insights. And all of that was related to enterprise IT. We don't have the same telemetry and visibility and data sets in the OT environments. But as a firm that specializes in that, we were getting called into instant response cases and similar on the OT side. And we started seeing, not only was there a lot of SolarWinds on the OT side, but most importantly and most impactfully, a couple of the original equipment manufacturers, a couple of the service providers and the integrators that have widespread access directly into OT networks from their locations were using SolarWinds and the compromised version of SolarWinds in their networks and on behalf of the asset owners and operators for them. Sometimes as SolarWinds, sometimes as a white labeled, there's another logo on the box, but it's just SolarWinds underneath it. And so we were able to show and find that, and going off the public attribution of it being Russia, that a Russian intelligence organization, whether or not they knew it, had direct remote access through the supply chain into gas turbine control software, manufacturing equipment, et cetera. So it wasn't just they got into OT, it was they got into OT at the control layer of some of the most sensitive and interesting critical infrastructure sites around the world. That was terrifying. But here's where it gets worse. Everybody generally can get on the idea that you can get compromised. Okay, prevention fails. Got it. But then in the national policy discussion, Congress, National Security Council, et cetera, not practitioner discussion, but national policy and at the CEO level, the conversation morphed from reduce cyber risk to, hey, the SolarWinds stuff, maybe we got compromised, okay, but that's a real concern of where it could be in the operations environments. We know exactly what software it is, SolarWinds. We know exactly what version it is. We know exactly what to look for the key indicators and the DNS logs and things like that. We know exactly what to go look for. Cool. Go look and tell us if we are currently compromised. And most companies couldn't. The vast majority of companies couldn't. And you have policymakers and CEOs going, hold on now. Again, we've got this solved. Remember, we've made all these investments. Why can't you even tell us what we have? Why can't you tell us once we know what to look for, what the forensics of this would be? And they're not using those technical terms, but that's the conversation. And the feedback was because everything we've been doing is on segmentation and firewalls and patching and antivirus. We don't have detection and response capabilities in our infrastructure. There are some companies who do. Okay, there's some really good companies out there that do that. But like the 90% of the infrastructure community cannot do that. They do not have OT specific ways to get visibility, detection, response plans, et cetera, the forensics of the problem. And so of all of this investment and all of this discussion over 20 plus years, to not even be able to determine if we're compromised by one of our strategic adversaries in a very impactful case, Congress and the Senate were like, man, these people are idiots. And I can't speak for every congressman. Obviously, I doubt all of them would say that. But I was getting called into a lot of meetings and with various subcommittees and committees in Congress and the Senate. I've testified there a couple times now, and they'll still call me for these types of things. And the conversations were not fun. The conversation was essentially, without verbatim saying it, but essentially, are these infrastructure owners incompetent? We've told them for 20 plus years this is important. And in our moment of need, they can't even answer the question if they've got it in their networks. We should regulate them. Like that was the absolute conversation that I had in multiple committees of, well, they're idiots-ish. We need to regulate them. And it was like, hold on, pump the brakes. Why do you think they're stupid? Well, they obviously haven't been paying attention. Like, that's not true. Yes, there may have been some misinvestments here or there. But for the most part, when those conversations took place, the places they got to was an honest conversation at the current state of infrastructure at the time. Our infrastructure is rapidly changing. Call it Industry 4.0, call it digital transformation, use whatever buzzwords you want. Our infrastructure is changing. The connectivity of it's changing. We're hyper accelerating into the future at a time that threats are now interested in ICS. There's some stuff that's happening that's different than when we had those conversations. But most importantly, what do you think they're not listening to? And the congressional discussions were, we have all these frameworks and all these standards and all these regulations, and obviously they're not following them if they can't even tell us if they're compromised. I was like, I see the disconnect. And so my team just did some analysis. We put out a blog on it, but the real purpose was to get it to Congress on what are all the standards and frameworks saying? And let's just take a high-level approach of prevention, detection, and response. And if you look at all the standards and frameworks, 6443, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, 853, all the different ones that are out there that could relate to infrastructure and ICS, you'll find that about 95% of all of the guidance is prevention. Patch, firewall, passwords, antivirus, segmentation, 95% of it, which leaves about 5% from Alabama. So you got math and 5 and 9. I think that's 5% for visibility, detection, response, recovery. So if 95% is all in one bucket and you've got like 4 or 5 other buckets that are splitting 5%, you're not going to have a really robust capability. And so part of the conversation back to Congress was these people aren't idiots. They've listened to the guidance as part of the problem. They're doing exactly what they've been told to do, but we've overweighted prevention and largely with enterprise and like IT to OT segmentation, not what we necessarily need to be doing. And a lot of the guidance tends to be copy and pasted IT security controls, which may not even make sense for what we're trying to accomplish in OT. So then the conversation was, okay, well, maybe we can work with the industry and maybe we can help guide them. And if they listen to us, okay. But if they don't, then maybe we should regulate. And so then getting into 2021, at the beginning of this year, that's when we start seeing a lot of stuff happen. And in my opinion, a lot of it has been good, where the White House reached out to the electric sector in one of the most positive moves I've ever seen, where the National Security Council and Nuremberg are some of these fantastic, I mean, holy crap, y'all, I'm not political one or the other. We've got some rock stars in terms of cybersecurity leadership in the government these days. Ann Nuremberger, Jen Easterly, Chris Inglis, Eric Goldstein, like you've got some phenomenal people. And Ann Nuremberger and her staff, with partnership with DHS and DOE, reached out to the CEOs of the power sector and said, hey, y'all, I think we've done a lot in prevention and I think we've done a lot in cyber, but we would really like to see a further investment into OT specifically. And we would like that to encompass detection and response. And we want you to share your insights with the government so we can see kind of, are there threats in our industrial infrastructure? I mean, talk about a nuanced discussion coming from the White House, top level policy. And they're having a conversation about OT detection and response. That's pretty technical and nuanced for that level. That's awesome. And they had that conversation with all the CEOs. Like 80% of the CEOs across the power sector were in meetings about these conversations. And the White House, in my opinion, did it perfectly. They said, here's why we care. Here's the threats we're seeing, the risk we see, the reason for this. Here's the what. The outcome we want to drive is where you can detect and respond to threats if you get breached, and we can know about it in the government. How you get there is up to you. What vendors you choose, what technology stacks, what implementation, what standards, what frameworks, you do that. So we're going to tell you the why and the what, but we trust you as good infrastructure providers and as experts at what you do to figure out the how. And we're not going to be able to figure out the how for every piece of infrastructure in the United States from DC. And that to me was perfect. So what happened? The CEOs turned to their staff, had an honest conversation, had a real deep dive, and everybody that I know that was in those conversations stepped up. And we should all be popping bottles of champagne, be excited about what our power sector did in that 100-day sprint. We had 155 utilities across the country say, we'll move. And so 155 went to adopt technologies and resources and similar to do more in OT. And we went from a place where 0% of our OT infrastructure in the electric power sector was being monitored with insights shared across the community to 70% of the electric sector by meter in a 100-day sprint. Good Lord, nothing even close to that has ever happened before. That's amazing. It's not all rainbows, though. What happened while all this was going on, you also have Oldsmar. So Oldsmar, Florida gets hit, and an adversary breaks into the OT side of the house and tries to poison the water system. Luckily, it got caught just by an operator being there and seeing the mouse move. And we can all talk about the technical realities of that and how it's not impressive. And I see all these InfoSec professionals sometimes, you're like, wasn't that interesting? It was just like compromising TeamViewer and doing them all. And like, whoa, wrong way to look at it. The right way to look at it is regardless of the technical sophistication, you had a foreign entity try to poison American citizens on American soil by going after the American water system. Whew, that is not a good feeling. That happened and Colonial Pipeline happened. Not exactly fun. I think Colonial actually did a lot of things right, and I think they got drugged through the media a little bit more than they should have. But either way, big pipeline goes down, water system, solar winds, Ukraine, crisis, everything comes back up again. And so now the congressional discussion is, hey, I'm glad this 100-day action plan thing from the White House was working in the electric sector, but we don't have time anywhere else. We got to move. And so you saw TSA step in, and TSA rolled out cyber regulations for the pipeline sector for the first time ever. And I want to defend TSA to say that there was immense amount of pressure on them to do something. So they had to. I think everybody understands they had to. But I think there's opportunities for learning from what happened, because we saw the exact opposite of what worked with the electric sector. What worked with the electric sector was, we're going to tell you the why and the what. We won't tell you how. We'll leave that up to you. And the sector responded. With the TSA security directives, they didn't say why. They didn't tell people what we were striving for in the outcome. They just said how. They said, you will use this level of encryption. You'll do these things. You'll patch all vulnerabilities in ICS within a 70-day window. You'll do this. You'll do this. It was really prescriptive guidance. Say there's 7 ways to mitigate a vulnerability inside of an operations environment. They prescribed 1. So whether or not that 1 is good or bad is not the point. They took the options out and they try to pretend that everybody had the same answers. If you followed TSA Security Directive 2 to a T, I promise you would be bringing down pipelines in this country. You cannot do all the things they're asking you to do, and you can't do it in the way and the timelines that they're prescribing it. And they gave the industry a 3-day heads up and comment period. Hey, we're going to regulate you. You have 3 days to get your comments on what our regulations are. I'm not here to cast shadows of doubt on TSA, but you can't go out to your infrastructure sector for 20 plus years and say private-public partnership, and we're here to be your partners, and then be like, oh, by the way, you have 3 days heads up. Here's the new regulations. Not good. So I think people behind the scenes, they're not being as public about it as I think they should be, but people behind the scenes are pretty pissed. So when you look at this, and we have these conversations about what's happening in operations technology today, I'm going to summarize some of these things. We're open up to questions here in about a couple minutes. When you look at what's going on, before we even start talking about the technical and what security controls work and what doesn't, and what we're seeing with the latest threats and what we're seeing with the latest vulnerabilities, understand that there is a mental model shift taking place at a national policy and board level to understand that reduced cyber risk is not a one-size-fits-all thing. And there really is differences between what's happening in the enterprise and what's happening in operations. And that there's a lot more focus that needs paid to operations, and that maybe over the years, we put a pretty heavy focus and prevent all the things, but we're not really good about detecting and responding. And so that is shifting. At the same time, you have some government efforts which are very voluntary and let's partner, and you have some government efforts largely influenced by Congress and Senate saying, time's up. I'm sorry. I don't care what got us here. 20 years ago, we were talking about this. We're not the best place right now, and it's national security. And so while it may not feel comfortable, we got to do what's right to protect our citizens and what's right to protect our constituents in our various congressional and Senate districts. And nobody's the bad guy in that. That logic follows. That logic makes sense. I disagree that going out and being prescriptive and thinking, what security controls make sense to a pipeline compressor station. I disagree that that's the answer, but we can all disagree. Either way, there's a reckoning happening and a mental shift taking place. Again, I hope that we can get more to the why and the what and not prescribe the how and leave the expertise up to the operators. But that's what's happening. So before we open up to questions, kind of what are we seeing then way down from policy into the cyber threats, vulnerabilities discussion, and some of the security controls that make sense and which ones don't? If you are interested in industrial cyber, my first comment to you is welcome to the community. There has never been a better time to get interested and focused on operations technology and getting experience there. All of the companies I know of out there are looking for that experience. They might include it in the IT side of the house. It might include it in the OT side of the house. I don't care, but there's not a lack of companies that want people to be more skilled and aware of the operations side of the house. So welcome, first up. Second up, it's a very, very mission-driven discussion. On the operations side of the house, if you're an IT security person wanting to get an OT, please do not come in to the power plant, the rail yard, the pharmaceutical site, taking your insights from IT and just bringing them over. I'm not saying your expertise is invalid. I'm just saying you got to pump the brakes. You don't need to come over and go, why is that Windows XP system not patched? You need to come over to that side of the house and go, hey, what are we trying to accomplish here? What is the mission of this site? Is it, carbons? Is it corn? Is it electric power? Like, what is the mission here? What are we trying to accomplish? What are some of the challenges you have? Now let's layer in, what are some of the risks? There's going to be threat-based risks off of what we see groups out there doing. There's going to be some consequence-based risks that no matter who does it or how they do it, these things, if they happen, that'd be a bad day. And you need to look at what are the actual scenarios, not controls. Well, here's what we're doing against phishing protection. Stop it. What are the scenarios? Well, step-by-step, kill chain, or whatever you want to use. Here's what a ransomware scenario in OT would look like and what it could possibly cause in our environment. Here's what a compromise of a safety system scenario looks like. Here's what a compromise of electric power looks like. Like, what is the start to finish scenario, and devise the security controls that make sense against those scenarios in that environment. And if you do that, you will likely come to very similar conclusions that I have. Okay, so I'm not going to prescribe to you in the same way I don't want policymakers to do it. Do these 3 things and you're okay. But I'll share with you what I've learned across all these different cases, all these different attacks, all these different experiences, kind of the top controls we see and why. So when we go into the operations side of the house, you will find that a lot of IT security controls tend to be about data security and system security, right? Hey, I've got data and PII and credit cards and things like that. How do I keep it protected and maybe encrypt it in transit and at rest? That way, if it's stolen, it's still protected. And they got a lot of system security. How do I have better product security? How do I make sure there's not vulnerabilities on this? If there are vulnerabilities, how do I stop exploitation? If they get exploited, how do I stop privilege escalation? How do I protect this system? So in enterprise security, it's not a hand wave here. There's more nuance here than this, but generally speaking, a lot of the things we think about tend to be data security and system security. When you get to the operations side of the house, you'll find that it tends to be system of systems security and physics. It's, there's data that's important there. And there's intellectual property in your manufacturing lines, not your email server. There's that kind of stuff. But a lot of it is, okay, you compromised a human machine interface. Now make the lights blink. I don't care. It's not, oh my gosh, they got on a system. It's, did they understand the function of system 1 inside the system of systems in a way to impact system 2? Did I understand what to do on the engineer workstation to change the logic on a controller in a way that had an impact in the physical world? It's systems of systems and what is the bounds of physics. You can't do things that are physically impossible in those environments, so let's stop worrying about it. Well, maybe they'll spin up the turbine in such a way that causes a nuclear meltdown. What? Like, what? That's not physically possible in the way this is constructed. You have to look at the bounds of physics. And if you come to that view, a similar view that I've gained over the years of systems and physics, what you'll find is, number one, it is important to have a defensible architecture. If I've got a IT OT merged network with flat network with unmanaged switches, and it's just hard to defend that. And so I need to get to a defensible network. That doesn't mean it's defended. Remember, adding the human on top of defensible makes defended. Just having good systems is just defensible. It's not a secure system. And so I'm going to have a defensible network. Maybe I use microsegmentation. Maybe I use software-defined networks. Maybe I use firewalls. It doesn't matter. At some point, I'm going to have an environment that is defensible. I'll probably do some tactical things like separating out Active Directory from the IT to OT so that it's not so easy for a ransomware operator just to spread down that thing like a highway of death. So there'll be things that I do, but I'll get to a place where my architecture helps prevent some of the biggest challenges out there and provides accessibility to defenders to get in there and get the data and insights they need to defend it. So that's number one. Number two, in a systems of systems world, I'm going to need to figure out what I have, how it's communicating. I'm going to need to detect threats not based on, hey, this malware dropped in the system, but the system to systems. So things like network monitoring are going to be a big priority item for folks because they can get asset identification and threat detection and help with response and get the right data sets. So that system monitoring, system to system monitoring, and understanding ICS protocols and what changes are happening. And hey, when VNet IP on a Yokogawa device is changing this, set command, it's actually changing the logic on this controller. You're going to need to know that. And so defensible architecture, that kind of network monitoring with ICS awareness. The third one down, you'll get to something like a key vulnerability management program. In all of our work, every year we publish these year in review reports. We'll do it again in February, but they're up on our site if you're interested. They're just free reports out to the community on the insights we have across threats and vulnerabilities and incident response cases. And our Intel team looks at every single vulnerability that comes out every year in ICS and evaluates every single one of them. And we do a simple measurement of green, yellow, red. Green is this doesn't introduce any risk that is not already available in the system. Well, if I do this vulnerability, I can access the controller. The system can already do that. I don't need that vulnerability. Yellow is, there's some new functionality, but it's not that high of a risk, but evaluate it when you can. And red is, there's real risk. Adversaries are already using this, or this is new functionality. You need to take advantage of this now. And when we do that simple measurement, we find only 7% of the vulnerabilities every year meet the red category. Like 60 of them are in the, your next maintenance period or downtime. Feel free to take a look at this and evaluate it. And patching may not be the right answer. It may just be a firewall control or something. And then there's like 30% of the vulnerabilities that are trash. And patching them or fixing them will probably cause you more problems than just leaving them. And so we just look at that one thing, and when I say key vulnerability management, it's not what's the CVSS. It's not here's some vulnerabilities. It's not, oh my gosh, it's Windows XP. It's which ones matter to the operations. Can it cause a loss of view? Can it cause a loss of control, loss of safety? Or is it a historian that's bridging the IT and the OT networks, and so compromising it will get me access into OT? Okay, that one matters. And so it's just address the ones smartly, take a risk-based approach and understanding which ones we should have to deal with. And you will find that it's not that many. And then the next control is an ICS tailored incident response plan. You're not going to respond to operations environments with the same run books, playbooks, TTXs, skill sets, people, etc. that you do in the enterprise. You get in there like, oh, what's a gas turbine? Like, oh God, please don't touch it, right? So you're going to have different skill sets there. You're going to need that plan, that response plan. And then lastly, which is an IT security control that works really well in many locations, but not all, is multi-factor authentication. You're going to need some access control security. And in today's age, multi-factor authentication tends to be the best control. It's not going to be possible in every location. So what's your compensating controls where it's not possible? But wherever it's possible to have GE or Honeywell or Foxborough or whoever, when they come into your site, they've got to use multi-factor authentication. That's a great control. So when you get down to it, out of all the insights we see and all the cases we've worked and all the threats and everything else, there's like 5 controls that if you were to do those 5 things, you would have a world-class OT security program. So I don't want anybody to be prescribing things in policy and regulations anyways about specific controls, but taking the playbook of the 30 or 40 things you could do in IT and copy and pasting in OT is not going to be helpful. And I will tell you, based on my experience and my insights, it's probably more damaging. Well, let's encrypt the network traffic. Why? What problem are you trying to solve? What is that accomplishing besides not allowing us to monitor it now? Like, just throw out the playbook. Your expertise will be valuable. Your insights will be valuable. First, learn the mission. Then think about the risk we're trying to solve for. Then bring over your expertise and tailor the components of your expertise that matter to operations. Don't just run the same playbook that you think works elsewhere. It's not going to work well. So anyways, in closing, and I'll leave about 15 minutes here for questions and so forth. In closing, there's a massive change happening in the OT security community. It's not that everything got so much worse all of a sudden. Yes, things are heating up. Yes, our infrastructure is changing and there's new risks. Yes, we need to look at those things. But a lot of what you're seeing play out in real time is that mental model shift from executives and policymakers realizing that there's business risk and national security risk that is there that they didn't fully account for. So now we're just trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we account for it without freaking everybody out? From a more tactical level down, the best thing you can do is go talk to your operators. Go talk to your staff. Take a box of donuts, a case of beer. Go talk to the operations people. Figure out what they're trying to solve for. Figure out their challenges. And then go look and tailor your expertise to help them out. And explicitly, I would recommend you consider a couple controls. Don't treat this like a Gantt chart with over the next 5 years, we're going to do these 50 things. Stop it. What are like 2 or 3 things we could go do consistently and do well and operationalize well that would massively reduce our risk? There's like 5 to start with that I would recommend. If you do those couple things and you do them well, massively change in the discussion. Cool. So with that, hopefully that gives you some insight into kind of what we're seeing in industrial these days. Why is it, different and so forth? We've got different missions, different systems, different threats, different risks. The security can't be the same. And even when you do find Windows in a power plant, you'll find IT systems in a power plant. Please don't treat it like an IT system. It's an OT system. It might look like a Windows system on the box, but when it's controlling software that deals with pressure and valves and things like that, don't touch it like it's an IT system. We need to take a tailored approach. So anyways, that's what I got. Hopefully that was useful. My last pitch is those of you that are in the military or from the military, that, hey, let's go tailor to a mission-driven approach and bring our expertise to bear while asking good questions and not pretending to be the experts all the time, you're going to find that culture is very well received in operations. And I hope you consider joining us. So over to my moderators and facilitators and folks, if you can, I see the comments. I don't know if you just want me to go directly to the comments, answer the questions, or if you want me to wait for one of you to dial in, but I'll go ahead and start talking until you do. So yeah, here's one that's highlighted from Ron. Thoughts on the idea that the best security should be invisible. So there's a couple different ways to take your question. I will take it in kind of two ways. For the first is, should we keep our security private so people don't know about it so they can't compromise it? And the second way would be, the best security is invisible in the sense that you're not putting a lot of stressors on people. You're just making good security controls. And in both directions, I'll say, actually, the first direction on should we be so uptight about our security that we don't talk about it? I think that's a mistake, actually, in the community. There's a whole lot of like, if the adversary knows what security controls you're doing, you're going to fail. I don't believe that to be true because there's so much nuance in how you implement things. If you're literally like, hey, we developed this product and here's the security controls in the product and here's exactly the detections that we have in coverage, and maybe that's problematic. But at a high level, I think we're a little oversensitive in the security community about what we do and do not talk about. But on the second one, which I think where you're actually trying to get to, of should it be invisible in the sense that we're not impacting people, I definitely agree. There's a ton of security controls that we put on people that just are stupid, and it's even worse when they don't help, and it's just putting barriers in people's place. There will be some friction that's okay, but we should try really hard to reduce that friction. I remember going out to a location in the United States for a power generation site, and it was a remote location, truly like segmented type environment, no CCTV and stuff like that inside of the control room. And there was a sticky note with a password on the computer to log in for safety critical systems. And the IT security people were like, how dare you? Password on sticky notes. And I was like, what? Why are you concerned? Well, in the pen test we just had, like, we could get password right there and right on the screen. I'm like, okay. But we already have access to those operation systems here. So the password isn't the most important piece of it. The password might actually be required in like a safety critical scenario. You don't want them to forget their password and be like, oh no, somebody died. Like they need to get access. And there's no like remote aspect here where people could like hack a camera and see the password. So is your concern just physical security? And they're like, yeah, well, we did it with the pen test. I'm like, yeah, but there's not a whole lot of like Russians paratrooping into the substation out here. Like, I'm not saying you can't consider it, but there's probably other compensating controls and physical security controls you can do other than freaking out about a sticky note password. Actually, I'm glad they have that there in case they need it. And so not only should sometimes security be invisible, but sometimes there's security things we want to do or correct. And we really got to ask, like, why are we doing it? And what problem are we trying to solve? And that's probably one of the best ways to make it invisible. Anyways, what else? I think, so it looks like people are highlighting things for me. That's super useful. Look at that. Look at that power of technology. All right. How long, in your opinion, will it take for our nation's ICS across electric, water, nuclear, et cetera, to be secure, or at least at a place where you'd be satisfied with the understanding that we have in security? You can never truly be comfortable. I would be, how long? I don't have a prediction on that. I think it's a multi-year effort for sure, though. But in my opinion, we have to be really careful about scope. And so when we talk about our nation's ICS, do you want Oldsmar, Florida to have the same level of security as the nuclear power plant in Georgia? Probably not. It's probably not reasonable. So I do think when we talk national security and business risk, what do I need the nation to do? National security risk. Then it's a business risk discussion. And when we look at like national security risk, one of the most important things is to define out what is actually critical infrastructure. People talk about critical infrastructure a lot. That scope is not actually well defined. And then it's, well, Southern Company. Southern Company is a phenomenal power company. Southern Company is critical infrastructure. Okay. Is everything in Southern Company critical infrastructure? Is the distribution substation down to the local populace of 5,000 people? Is that critical infrastructure? And we already have ways of looking at that. FERC, as a federal authority, has already evaluated out, hey, this is critical, this is not critical. And so I know this wasn't your question, but it's a good tangent for me to take anyways. I need us to define scope better and get a common understanding of what the problem is we're trying to solve. And when we do that effectively, your community responds effectively. When we go out to the community and say, you need to protect all things at all times against all things, it's not going to work. They can't do it. There's not enough resources for it. Most of your small water facilities, as an example, or small electric power facilities might not even have an IT person. And we're talking about being prepared against Russia and China. Like, I don't know that is the right conversation. But for our critical sites and critical infrastructure, and getting to a place where we feel comfortable in ICS security with a national security mindset, those 5 controls I mentioned would make me comfortable. And I think they're all doable within inside of a 3 to 4 year window across all these sites. But you need alignment, and you need to discuss the problem and get that agreement. Because if you go to a chemical company, as an example, or let's say power companies are easy to use because they've typically done a lot too. If you take a typical power company, and is there alignment on what problem we're trying to solve? And I would say the answer is no. And think about it from their perspective. And I can't speak for all power companies, right? But in a typical power company, executive or security team hears from the FBI in their territory about what they think is the most important and what the risks are and what they should do about it. But the power company probably has multiple territories. There's probably multiple FBI field offices they're hearing from. There's every single base, military base in any of their power territory, which could span multi-state. They're hearing from the base commanders about what they need. You're hearing from the Department of Energy. You're hearing from FERC. You're hearing from the Department of Homeland Security. You're separately hearing from CISA. Sometimes you're also hearing from TSA. A typical power company is hearing from 8 or 9 different portions of the U.S. government with 3 or 4 different representatives underneath that about, hey, it's only these 2 or 3 things we need you to fix at these 2 or 3 sites. You put all that together and you've got 30, 40, 50 things that they're supposed to do at all their sites, and it's conflicting. And so one of the most important things to do is get alignment and understanding of what are we really trying to solve for. And I think that would hurry the hell up on a lot. A lot right now is analysis paralysis. That's what I think the White House did so well when they talked to the electric sector. As they said, forget everything else for a second. OT, specific detection, response. We need you to focus there. And only at sites that can impact more than 50,000 people in a population center. Boom. That was gold, like, well done. And that got the whole community to move. We need more of that. All right, next one. I'd love to get into OT, IIoT side of the house. Currently attending SANS for my bachelor's. Yes, I teach over at SANS. For those who are unaware, the Grid one, the ICS 515 is my class, so good stuff. Are the GICSP and Grid certs good baselines for me to get started? So the GICSP is fantastic for that baseline approach of learning the language and so forth. The ICS 515 class is fantastic for learning about the threats and the insights and how would we monitor these systems and how we do all the stuff that I just talked about. And those are good. And I'm obviously biased, but I would say that it is incredibly important to take whatever you apply and get in the field as fast as possible. Because the lecture and stuff for 6 days, yeah, it'll get you to the conversation, but the skill sets are going to be developed in the field, working in the field and so forth. Also, for those of you that can't afford SANS classes or don't have the opportunity, I just put a link in the private chat. If one of the moderators can put it up for everybody else. That's a blog I wrote, or you just Google search a collection of resources for getting started in ICS security. It's a blog that I wrote that has a bunch of free resources on there, papers and videos and things like that. And of course, I want you to take the SANS classes, and it's a better use of time. Just do 6 days and get there. But as additional study, or for those of you that can't take the SANS classes, that blog will get you a bunch of resources to learn the language, then get out in the field and go get some experience there. So we'll see if we can't paste that over. If nothing, if they don't paste it over, just Google a collection of resources to get started in ICS security, and it'll take you to my blog, which is robertemlee.org. All right, perfect. Next question. As a historian custodian, that's good. I like that title. It's almost as good as a dam engineer in the hydroelectric facility world. Anyways, as a historian custodian, I'm interested in getting into the OT security side. What are some good resources or areas of target training? There you go. All right, that blog that I just mentioned out, perfect place to get started. And also, I'm not trying to like pitch our technology and stuff at Dragos, but it's really good resources out there. If you just go to dragos.com, there's a ton of blogs and webinars. We have these phenomenal people across our company that are constantly trying to educate people. So you won't find so much like Dragos platform is the best thing ever. You'll find a lot of like, oh, here's a blog about how to do these things, and here's some resources here. And the year in review reports are really good help as well. With the dangers of offensive security assessments on the OT side, like scan equals boom, what are the ways to gain the contextual awareness of an environment on a more continual basis? Have you seen assessments done well and not well? Great. The first thing is, what are we trying to solve for? And a lot of times I see people ask for like a pen test, and you're like, what are you worried about? Well, we'd like to identify remote connectivity in our sites to be able to go get a better defensible infrastructure. So you don't need a pen test for that. Like, you need an architecture review and looking at where you have your architecture and network traffic and things like that. So the first thing is to figure out what they need in the assessment. But there are some then points in your maturity. After you get those 5 controls that we talked about earlier in place, then there's points of, yeah, we think we're in a good place. I'd like the offensive security assessments, the pen test, the red team to help validate what we know. And I have found that it's going to be way more purple teaming. Austin Scott on our team talks about this a lot and throws it out there in DEF CON talks and similar. And just go look up Austin Scott and purple teaming and ICS. I find it's way more purple teaming of, we're going to do these things. We're going to do it with you. And we're going to tell you, here's the command we're going to run. Do you think this is okay? Hey, are we in a maintenance period or something that we can accomplish this together? Operations is bought in, security is bought in, and we're going through it together. And it's really scoped to what exactly are we trying to do. There is a different challenge in enterprise when people are trying to solve for, well, I don't want to give a heads up. I want to do a true pen test or true red team where there is no heads up, and don't bound me by scope. Anything should be in limits. That may work in enterprise. That'll get people hurt on operations. So we need really scope to what exactly we're trying to solve, and then it be more conducted together. The other way to treat that is you're testing your people. And so a red team to emulate a threat, to be able to test the blue team, that's great. But then you're going to bring in the operations people and say, hey, we'll do this with you to help us understand what we can and can't do. And our purpose is to test these aspects of the blue team. So you can still do it without giving them all the heads up, but somebody's got to know. And what I've seen done very not well is doing things in operations that are not coordinated with the operations personnel, or that are done at the wrong time. Because you can do a lot of really interesting stuff in a rail yard, as an example, but not when people are on the locomotives, and so there's timing considerations and scope considerations. And if you have the time and scope correct, and you understand what you're trying to accomplish, and you make sure IT and OT is at the table, you can really do it well. When thinking about a career experience, you get an enterprise IT security, and enterprise security is very portable from company to company. It sounds like you're saying OT experience is going to be really focused on the physical devices of that company, which doesn't sound as portable. If you're interested in OT security, do you have to focus on a specific industry? Great. So I'm saying that IT to OT isn't as portable, but the OT security experience relative to other companies is relatively portable. You will have different industry considerations, but it's not going to be like a device consideration. So again, it's not a product security issue in our world. So not knowing the difference between a Honeywell Experion and a Yokogawa system is not going to be that big of a deal. The physical device, not going to be that big of a deal. But do I understand how a wastewater treatment facility works? Do I understand the physical process? Do I understand what they're trying to accomplish? If I don't understand that, it is going to be hard to come from electric power and just be like, well, here's what we should do. It's like, well, you kind of need some industry tailing. So what I would say is enterprise IT experience into OT, think like 5 to 10% of it's portable. OT experience to other OT locations, it's probably 50 to 60% portable. But that last bit is going to be about the industry or the mission of the site, not about physical devices and systems. It's going to be, do I understand how electric power is generated? And therefore, I can then bring in my skill sets and work with that staff. Are there any open source ICS, SCADA, kind of et cetera things to play with to get started on hands-on experience that we'd recommend? Hardware that might be eBayable? Absolutely. So on the link I was telling you about, there's some of that resources. But if you're trying to like build a home lab and things like that, there's tons of controllers and things on eBay. Just realize you're not trying to solve for, can I understand this Rockwell controller? You're trying to understand, can I understand how HMIs and EWSs and things and historians interact with this environment to accomplish a process? And so take that system level approach, and you can go pick out anything you want. Open source wise, there's some like Conpot and kind of like some software emulation stuff out there. But remember, you need to build a little network. I mean, for a while, I had a 70-gallon fish tank. I don't even like fish, but I built a water cleaning process just so I could have a couple of human machine interfaces, engineer workstations, and controllers that actually had physical input with temperature and chlorine levels and things like that. And so I built that kind of lab. Cost me a couple $1,000, which sucks, but it was a great lab for me to get hands-on experience and so forth. If you cut out the fish tank and cut out some other stuff, you probably get away for sub-$1,000, but you're still going to need to build something out, and it's not going to just be open source. Though there are some open source things out there and get you started, but many of those will be on that blog for you. If you're going to start with hardware, though, I would look at Rockwell Control Logics software and hardware on eBay. Those are relatively cheap. and there's a lot of documentation for how to use them. All right.
All right. I think we're almost at our time here. We ran out of questions, unless anybody has one more quick one here.
I told you I was going to run you over and screw up your schedule, and we are exactly on time. So that is
We're
some
right on time.
master level expertise by the audience and by you to control me, which as a control systems, person, the control should be maintained. So that's good. All right. Well, appreciate you having me. Appreciate the audience for the good questions and tuning in. And yeah, thanks, y'all. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks for coming. We appreciate your time. All right, everyone. Jump over to the sessions. Let's have a good rest of the day.